Guys, welcome back to my channel. In the Science of the Future format, today we're talking about Oppenheimer. Let's get started. The film begins with Oppenheimer approaching the new physics. It is explained that there is a new school of thought regarding physics. But now, let's try to understand what the new physics is and see if it's portrayed accurately in the film compared to how it really is. Let's start by trying to understand what the new physics they are talking about in the video is. There are two lines of research that then intertwine into what we now call quantum mechanics. First, there is one aspect of this new field that studies the structure of the atom, and it was thought to be something like a Pandoro with candied fruit. There are definitely some parts cut from the film. For example, key characters who worked on the project are missing. Thousands of scientists worked on the Manhattan Project. And most importantly, the film is called Oppenheimer, not the Trinity Project. So in reality, for example, all the scientists who weren't part of Oppenheimer's everyday life were ignored from the start. In the film, there's Feynman, and he's hardly ever mentioned. And the one with the bongos is the one playing the bongos. His name is only mentioned when they destroy the glasses for the explosion, and someone turns around and says, "You do, but do you want the glasses?" And he, who was a genius, but also an idiot, says no, because the windshield glass will stop the UV. Which is true, but it doesn't stop visible light. And this part is not shown in the film. For hours he only saw purple. He couldn't see anything anymore because he was completely blinded by the explosion. In the film, they don't show him wandering around bumping into things, but that's how it actually went. The construction of the bomb consists of a central sphere. And then there are polygons placed around it, called explosive lenses. And what are they for? They are meant to create an explosion that compresses the plutonium core. This is because the plutonium core needs to be compressed to reach so-called supercriticality. The moment when the atoms are so close to each other that if I break one, the neutrons from the first break will go on to break the second. So, I need to compress this. And to do that, it's necessary to make those explosive lenses explode. And those explosions, instead of being directed in all directions, must apply pressure inward. In reality, there's a slight change. The bomb was supposed to be peach-colored, but at one point they were afraid of blowing up the world. Did that moment really happen? It was Teller who introduced the fear, as shown in the film. Teller himself says, "Guys, but the atmosphere is full of nitrogen atoms, and if they fuse, they emit new energy. So they heat up the surrounding atoms and so on, in a chain reaction. Taylor points out this problem, and then they do the calculations, and he says, okay, there shouldn't be a problem. Today we know that this is impossible, meaning setting it on fire. And it's nature that prevents it. A bomb would need to have the power of hundreds of times more. In the film, there is a beautiful depiction of how the scientific community works, with Oppenheimer opposing the restriction of all knowledge, because otherwise physicists wouldn't be able to reach a solution. It's also well done. These bombs are made of plutonium. There was a core to make another bomb after Nagasaki, in case the Japanese hadn't surrendered. However, there was also the entire path of uranium, which would lead to the Hiroshima bomb. The Hiroshima bomb is physically different. And it's great because they explored multiple options, namely the plutonium bomb and the uranium bomb. There are incredible things like the fish tank or bowl with marbles. And that thing is true. The United States produced 4 bombs. The first, which is the gadget, the one from the Trinity test, a copy of it which would be dropped on Nagasaki, so the second one never actually used. We can say that uranium is present in nature but dirty, in quotation marks, meaning that most of the uranium we find in nature is the so-called uranium-238, which has 92 protons and 146 neutrons. Uranium has several isotopes, including uranium-235 and uranium-238. Neutrons in the nucleus help stabilize the nucleus itself. If a nucleus has fewer neutrons, it can become more unstable. Uranium-235 exists in nature, but it makes up only about 0.71% of natural uranium, while uranium-238 is much more abundant. Plutonium does not occur naturally in significant amounts and must be artificially produced, typically in nuclear reactors like those designed by Fermi. But now let's talk about the famous explosion of the atomic bomb. Because after they built the bomb, we see the actual Trinity test with Oppenheimer and all the scientists there waiting for the bomb to explode. Shout them, but from a visual perspective, it's believable, and also technically, let's see if it's credible. Well, it turned out well about 95%, because then there's a final shot of the mushroom cloud that's done with forced perspective. But it's very interesting how they also created the so-called Mach wave, which can be seen when the bubble expands. There's a sort of bulging on the ground. The Mach wave is due to the shock wave expanding, and then part of it bounces off the ground, interfering with the rest of the shock wave that is still expanding, forming a kind of bulge. It may sound silly, but it's not. But the Mach wave is fundamental to the atomic bomb and relates to its destructive power. It represents the part of the shock wave with the maximum pressure. If I simply place the bomb on the ground, the destructive power is reduced, because part of the Mach wave is disturbed by the ground. This is why in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they made it explode at 500 and 600 meters altitude. It is very well represented in the film. The part where they tell people to lie down on the mattresses, turn over, and when they see the light illuminating the mountain, they should turn to look at it is true, because they feared the shock wave. If they had been standing, it would have made them fall or caused internal organ damage. Because if I expose more surface area to the shock wave, I will get hurt more. In the case of a nuclear explosion today, they tell you to lie down and wait for the shock wave to pass. And then you should also pray. The only part that perhaps disappointed me was the one about Enrico Fermi. The fact is that, at the moment of the explosion, we know from the accounts of those who were present that Fermi took a piece of paper, tore it into small pieces, and threw them to see how much they were displaced by the shock wave. Fermi would then calculate the bomb's yield in kilotons. This way. This would have been a very interesting thing to show. It's a shame. At the Trinity test, the amount of radiation shouldn't have been monstrous. However, many scientists from the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer first among them, would later die of cancer. So the fact that the film didn't show concern for radiation is actually sensible. But in the film, during the meeting with the Secretary of War, there's something absurd about how Kyoto is dismissed. And this is true. Then, Nagasaki is hit, but it wasn't supposed to be. Another city was meant to be targeted. However, because the sky was cloudy, they couldn't observe the effects. So they decided to drop it on Nagasaki, which was the city designated for the third bomb. Okay guys, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you in the next video.